Good morning and welcome to the C4 Metro Subcommittee meeting on May 17. Commissioner Savas and Councilor Sherman are your co-chairs and the meeting is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Looks like we have a thin representation from the cities this morning. I see four of our city mayors here, or almost mayor, Councilor Pratt and Councilor Sherman and Mayor Buck and Mayor Milch. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know, Mayor Rory Bieltowski from West Lynn won his race by a landslide last night. It was like 80-something%. So wanted to congratulate him this morning, but I'm not sure he'll be here. There's a lot on the agenda for JPACT tomorrow, quite a bit, so much so that I'm kind of concerned that we won't really have any time to have any substantive discussion, as has been the pattern for a long time. Overall arching concern for a long time, we've added a half an hour to the JPAC meetings, and instead of making more room for conversation, it's made more room for content. It's been very difficult. So I just want to express that. I don't know how we're going to get through it tomorrow morning, frankly. So with that, Councilor Sherman, you want to introduce yourself and take over?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Commissioner Savas. Future Mayor Brett Sherman here, City Councilor, Happy Valley. Enjoying hosting this on a bright and sunny Wednesday morning. So thank you to all for coming. Good to see you all. As Commissioner Savas said, we do have a lot of stuff on the docket for JPAC tomorrow, and we'll get a chance to review some of that today. So with us today, we've got Kim Ellis from Metro, who's going to kick us off with our RTP update, and anything else you want to bring to the table, you're welcome to share with us today, Kim.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Sherman. So I will share my screen, and I did prepare a brief presentation that I will go through pretty quickly, just so that you do have some time to provide any feedback or discussion amongst yourselves about it. The RTP is a key part of JPAC's responsibility, and this presentation is what we'll be giving to JPAC tomorrow as well. But I just want to recap. You've been part of many discussions, several of you, on the draft system analysis. There was the joint workshop of JPAC and Metro Council last week. And so I want to share some of what was said at that meeting, and then hear your feedback about opportunities for improving the draft list, because the findings that we have around the investments that have been submitted by all of the partners is that we're having mixed outcomes in terms of achieving the broader goals that you all helped shape last year as part of the RTP update. And one thing that Trent had asked too for me to share is just, what is our trajectory with this regional transportation plan? And so that trajectory, we are working to have the plan update completed by the end of November this year. And right now we're working really hard with your staff and others to develop a draft plan, refine potentially the project list to the extent that it's possible to do that before the public review draft is released on July 10th. We'll be having a 45-day comment period. And then in the fall, the JPAC discussions are really going to be working to shape a recommendation to the Metro Council. We'll also be working through the Metro Policy Advisory Committee. They have an advisory role to the Metro Council because the Regional Transportation Plan is a land use action under state law. So there will be a lot of discussion this summer of the draft plan. One thing I just want to highlight is the work that we're doing to create this draft plan is a starting point, not an end point. And we expect that there's going to be a lot of policy discussion around the project, some of the new policies and other pieces that we will be raising for policy discussion at the JPAC, MPAC, and council tables as we go through that public review and adoption process. So with that said, last January, we initiated a call for projects for all of the local partner cities, counties, transit providers, ODOT, also trail districts, parks and recreation districts were eligible to submit projects. More than $73 billion worth of projects were submitted all across the region. There were revenue forecasts that we worked to develop with each of the jurisdictions And so the projects that were submitted were aimed at achieving the RTP goals, but also to fit within those financial budgets that we worked to set parameters which are required under federal law. Of that $73 billion worth of investment, about a third is going to capital projects, so walking and biking connections, high capacity transit, road and bridge improvements that also have active transportation and completing sidewalks and bike facilities in addition to road related investments. The throughway system, you've had a lot of discussions around those projects, but they're the three big projects, but other throughway investments in the region. The Interstate Bridge project represents about a quarter of that capital investment at $6 billion. And then there's also some freight access and information and technology type investments. Another third of the plan goes towards operating and the existing and expanded transit service that both SMART and TriMet put forward, and then the remaining is going towards maintenance of the system. So this is a slightly refined way of presenting this information, but just to highlight that transit service is a really key part of the project list in addition to the capital investments, but a significant portion is still going to maintaining the system. Another way to look at the list of investments that have been submitted is about 10 projects in the plan represent about 50% of the capital spending. And so this is these projects here, these 10 projects represent 50% of that $25 billion worth of investment in the system. There's a lot of small projects that are $2 million or more throughout the system. And so there's approximately 800 projects that were submitted to the financially constrained list, but this just gives you a flavor. A significant highway investment, the Burnside Bridge, the Southwest Corridor light rail project did not fit. The whole construction of the project at $4 billion did not fit within the financially constrained revenue forecast, but there is work to continue planning, preliminary engineering and right-of-way to keep it moving forward. Boom Bridge, Sunrise Corridor Phase 2, which many of you I think are very familiar with, the mobility pricing project, and then 2 high capacity transit projects, TV Highway Corridor and 82nd Avenue. In the system analysis, as I said at the beginning, we've been reporting that out. In your packet is a briefing book that we've put together, and that was the basis for the workshop last week. But we're really showing in the preliminary analysis of the projects that we're making progress towards our goals, but not achieving all of the targets that have been set out in the RTP, and in particular, it's mixed results around mobility, equity, and the economy. And truly of concern, and this was also a topic of a lot of discussion at the workshop last week, is that we are not on track to meet our safety goals, and we're in fact moving in the wrong direction, particularly with pedestrian fatalities and deaths and serious injuries on the transportation system. And so in response to that, we have some recommendations that I'll cover. We've also been doing significant engagement of community for all across the region, and in your packet is a summary of all of the work that has been done and who we've been engaging. We're in the process of preparing summary reports. There's a 4-page overview in your packet, but safety continues to be a top concern, both in terms of the fatalities and serious injuries, particularly while walking and biking, but also personal safety, especially in relation to walking, taking transit, waiting at bus stops and stations. There's a strong sense of we're in a climate emergency and we need to be doing more in this RTP to reduce emissions. Maintenance continues to be a priority. There's a desire for more transit, and walking continues to be having more walking connections throughout the region, particularly that are accessible to all people walking and rolling in the future. And in the engagement that was conducted this spring, these are ideas that community members identified. as ways to address the concerns and needs that they are prioritizing. So making improvements around transit stops, both in terms of getting sidewalks there, but also adding shelters and lighting, making it a more convenient and welcoming space. Having unarmed safety presence, which is something around at transit stations and that on transit, and that is something that TriMet has been actively implementing already. Completing the sidewalk network, I already said, but making sure transit's affordable, keeping the sidewalks and roadways in a good state of repair and is another area. And then continuing to increase funding for transit service and active transportation, which do not have the same types of dedicated resources that road related projects have traditionally, and so that we can do more to invest in those areas. Last week at the JPACT Metro Council workshop, just some overarching themes that we heard. There was a strong recognition we're at a pivotal moment, that the RTP is an important tool and represents a statement of the region's shared values and priorities, and that it needs to include investments that are supporting all parts of the region and catching up in areas that have not been invested in at the same levels as other parts. There is also a recognition that the projects in the near-term project list, so between now and 2030, are the projects that are most likely to be built and are going to have the greatest impact, particularly in the near term, on achieving some of these really important issues that the region is grappling with safety, climate, and affordability. And so we should be looking at that list to see if it really represents what this region needs and is a priority of JPACT and the Metro Council. There was also a lot of discussion about this being an opportunity to identify state policy and funding changes to help support the region. So this is a comment that I think resonated with a lot of members there. And then there was also significant discussion about future work needed to really look at housing and transportation affordability and displacement in an integrated manner, particularly around high capacity transit. Some of the feedback we heard on the draft project list is I think there was consensus or support that we need to have more investment and safety, particularly on for projects that are on high injury corridors that are either safety projects or that those projects should have safety elements in them. There's concern about not meeting the climate targets, and let's do more to make sure that we get there and have more discussion about that. And also raised was just a lack of investment at the edges. And this is, I think, in part related to that displacement issue that as communities, particularly communities of color, people with low income are moving, they're moving to different parts of the region for different reasons, but making sure that we have a balanced multimodal transportation system in areas that people are living. And then there was feedback on the measurement and just sort of acknowledgement that the analysis that we do is still a pretty high level and that we need additional local data and knowledge to help really identify solutions to address these issues, and that we should review the targets as we are reviewing the draft plan this summer to see whether these are the right measures of success as we are continuing to go forward. So these are some opportunities here that staff have identified to further advance the RTP goals, particularly in the near term. When we initiated the call for projects back in January, we basically allowed for, and C4 Subcommittee forwarded a draft project list to the process that was coordinated to C4 Subcommittee and with C4 and each of the jurisdictions, but have up until May 24th to make any refinements to the project list, both to address any of the analysis findings, the community feedback, or just to address technical corrections or other things like that. So we still have that window until next week that there is an opportunity to make further refinements. And then certainly there's an opportunity through the public comment period to also identify additional refinements if desired, but updating project descriptions to better show how they're addressing the 5 RTP goals, looking for opportunities to maybe shift project timing to accelerate projects to the near term that are particularly completing gaps in the networks, addressing safety on the high injury corridors, as I said, and investing in those equity focus areas. And there are some bundled projects that are not place specific or really defined as to what the projects are. They're sort of placeholders for safety and operations or other types of things. And that's another opportunity to actually be more specific. This actually really more applies to ODOT. They have larger bundled projects, but that could be an opportunity because we can, not knowing where they are or what they are, we can't really evaluate how they're helping support the goals and may identify ways that we can go forward. So in terms of what's next, we'll share this information tomorrow and continue the discussion. And then JPACT and the council will be asked in June to release a draft plan and project list. And for public review, we'll go through a 45-day public comment period. And that's really going to be a time for public agencies and policymakers really to sort of dig into the plan even more and provide feedback. But we'll also have other public engagement opportunities. And just to continue to reinforce that this is not an endpoint, it's a starting point for a discussion. I think just recognizing the times that we're in and the big issues that our region is facing, there's a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty, that we will be working through that with you this summer and into the fall as we go to final adoption in November. So with that, I will, this is a discussion question that we're going to pose for JPAC tomorrow, and I welcome your feedback as well. If you see other opportunities for improving the projects, or if you want to share other thoughts and observations. Several of you were at the JPAC workshop last week as well.
Very good. Thank you very much for the presentation. Always good to see that one, and nice to have you here as well. Commissioner Savas, I see you have your hand up. You can lead us off today.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's incumbent upon me to at least share with you my experience of the workshops, the RTP workshops. And that experience has been really inadequate time to, say that again, inadequate time to actually discuss some of these gnarly issues that Kim kind of outlined in her slides there. It was emblematic once again last Thursday morning, or yeah, I believe it was Thursday morning. And the facilitator kept on saying through the meeting, oh, there'll be plenty of time to talk about, plenty of time for you all to talk about this in future meetings. And instead of giving really ample opportunity to discuss things, we were kind of rushed through the presentation, and we had a couple opportunities, but I thought it was ironic in a sense that, we were really cut short on conversation, but yet the meeting ended 15 minutes early. It appears to me that the conversations and the freedom of conversation happens at the Metro Council more so than it happens at the JPAC table. And tomorrow, again, saw a very busy, packed agenda. I'm very concerned. I just don't know when. Kim, I don't want to put you on the spot, really respect you. This is not directed towards you, but when will we actually have JPAC members have substantive time to actually discuss these gnarly issues? As the facilitator indicated, there would be time. Do you have any idea when that is going to be, when that carve out is there?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Savas. There is time for the RTP discussion items throughout the summer, at the meetings that are scheduled and throughout the fall. So we're going to continue to be bringing topics forward. And as we go through the public comment period, we will be working with TPAC to flag policy discussions for JPAC. It won't be possible to talk about everything, but really what are the most important things to be spending time as we're finalizing this plan. And then also setting the table for future work, where many of these issues are gnarly, just as you said, and they're not going to be fully resolved in the context of this RTP, but we want to do as much as we can within this process, and also map out what some of the future work and future discussions that are going to be needed. We've had a lot of discussion, I would say, at JPACT. There's been a significant amount of discussion, and I'm sorry that you don't feel that the workshops have allowed for adequate discussion, but there have been a lot of discussions at those workshops, at JPACT meetings, scoping, and we spent 6 months scoping the RTP process. And now things are going to be starting to come together as we work to finalize the plan. And I will share your feedback, and I assume you'll be sharing this feedback tomorrow as well.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kim. I just wanted to clarify. You had mentioned that C4 had forwarded the project list, but in reality, that was the list that the technical committees came up with that was submitted to C4. We just reviewed it and sent it back to you. Is that correct?
I think you also endorsed it for purposes of the RTP. And I think that's that process, if it's important for you all to know what projects are being submitted on behalf of your communities, and we can continue to work to review those projects. But each city also took an action on the projects that they forwarded, and that came to C4. So there were city council meetings and discussion about those draft project lists, and they were for the purposes of evaluation and updating the priorities around the goals, and to also support community priorities. But there is room for improvement. ODOT and TriMet and SMART also provided opportunity for feedback on their draft priorities, and those conversations were also happening at the same time.
Yeah, I guess I'll finish with this piece here. And again, I think it's incumbent upon me to share with you, how these discussions have occurred. And there has been, again, it's of course staff's needs to make their presentations, but it seems to be there's more time committed to the presentations, obviously, but not really equal or ample opportunity to really discuss these big, complicated issues. I would encourage people to listen maybe it was recorded, to the conversation. There was a gentleman there from TPAC, a new member. He had talked about displacement, and he had flagged a number of issues. I won't say red flag, but flagged a number of issues. And I think he said something that resonated with me, and I think it resonated with a lot of other folks who spoke to me after the meeting was over Thursday morning. That was, we need to pull different levers. Continue doing the same thing and expect a different result is problematic. And we just got to ask ourselves, why is it that there was a map present there that showed where a lot of accidents were, where some of the poverty areas were. It was a heat map of where some of the poverty areas were. But it seems that we're headed in the wrong direction. So we make investments in these areas, but yet pedestrian accidents, bicycle accidents are going up. We are not really spreading the investments out across the region equally or strategically. I think people would argue that. Of course, people say, well, we are being strategic, but the fact that they're going the wrong direction, I think, flags that maybe the strategy we're using is not the strategy that's really working. And I think the climate goals that we're not going to achieve, the safety goals we're not going to achieve, are again, they're flags to me. But when it comes to displacement in particular, that issue there is some science, there are white papers about that, and there's not complex issue indeed, but it has shown where you focus investments, you create displacement. So therefore, some people have come to the logical conclusion around the country that you spread your investments around equally, regionally, you'll not have those great displacement impacts. And again, areas of high displacement or areas where people are displaced or where the accidents are going up. It's clear to me, but there again, I've kind of analyzed a lot of data. I'll stop there, folks. Let you all speak. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. Many, many good comments. And I think I will just, as co-chair, I can jump the line for a second. I'd like to kind of piggyback on Commissioner Savas's comments. And, one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is, I think, Kim, you alluded to this in your slides, and I would say that a of all the goals that we've tried to lay out, there are very, very few that are actually even close to being met with what's been accomplished so far. Most of them, at least in the data I saw from the analysis, I think it was maybe JPACT data, we're falling incredibly short on a lot of these metrics. And so I guess the question I would have is, as we then try to address these and come up with solutions, which bodies will be kind of looking to create either existing solutions or improved solutions or new solutions, and then how do they get incorporated into the RTP going forward? How do these things, how do we make a difference, a positive difference to a lot of these metrics that we are falling really short on? So I think, and I guess not only looking at improving them and achieving some, but then at the same time, I'd be curious what the outcomes are. I think one of the metrics we were looking at that were shown was completion of pedestrian biking networks, and in like the equity focused areas, we're like 90+% complete. I want to know if they're being used. I want to know what the positive outcome is from that completion versus the 60 or 70% areas, which are like the industrial and the business areas that we need to have these that are much more difficult and more expensive to deploy in. So sorry that I jumped the line, but I guess that's really my question is, how do we, who comes up with the solutions and how do we incorporate them into the RTP?
Well, I think part of the answer is you all, and community, defining what are priorities. We have lots of information about what all of the problems are, but I think that Bill Beamer is who Commissioner Savas was referring to, who's a TPAC community representative, and I think some of it is how, can we bring new information in a way that is more actionable? I think that's what we are trying to do with this RTP and how we're presenting information. But I think it's policymakers. It's also changing, I think, some of the plans at the local level, and that's a longer process. Changing policy at the state level, that's a longer process. And the RTP is a moment in time, and we come back every 5 years. And so that again, laying out what are the things that this region, this body here, the region as a whole, JPACT and the Metro Council, what are the things that we need? What can we do now to help make more progress now? But then laying out what does that work look like going between now and the next RTP update, and what's that set of work that we're all doing together, because it isn't any one. It's going to have it's going to be community level, it's going to be local governments, it's going to be state governments, federal governments, metro government. It's going to take everybody doing different parts together, working together in the same direction.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I think, as a layperson, I look at this and I say, well, but the RTP is one of the major funding mechanisms that we have access to. And so to have that coordinated effort obviously makes sense when we're able to do that. So I appreciate that. I'll jump out. Commissioner Mitchell, you are next up.
As I listened to that presentation, one phrase really jumped out at me as representing a city in Clackamas County, and that was a comment, a concern of a lack of investment at the edges, because Clackamas County, we're on the edge. And I think that, to me, that was our marching orders as this process going forward, to make sure that Clackamas County gets a fair share of the investment. We're living on the edge, and we have serious needs, as Commissioner Savas and others have said.
Very good. Thank you for that comment. And very salient point. Mayor Buck, you're next up.
Thanks. Thank you, Councilor Sherman. Good morning. I had a question about the, we're having this conversation around the comprehensive transportation funding, at the state now. And we've kind of, in this RTP, been talking through this process about the RMPP. And now as, we go back and we have our, tolling program, as we tend to take a step back with ODOT and our partners at the state and these local partners here, how does that conversation fit into the RTP and this kind of current concept of the RMPP, and how does that conversation remain, flexible, this funding conversation as we go forward and we look at other ways. I think there's many of us who want to explore other ways than this kind of current path we've been venturing down, talking about VMT. I mean, are we kind of putting ourselves in a corner by putting all of the kind of going down this RMPP path?
That's a great question. I think there's still uncertainty about what it means on the pause that the governor has requested of ODOT. Those projects are going through more detailed planning. It doesn't preclude those broader statewide conversations that are happening around a VMT fee, the road user charge. I think some of the work that we have done, that any one of those alone is not going to actually be sufficient, and that we'll probably need to have some combination of that. And that particularly was salient in the climate analysis that we've been doing on meeting our state targets. We know that there is a need for more transportation funding. We can prioritize the funding we have in different ways, but there's also a need for just more funding. We're a growing region, we're a major metropolitan area, and more funding will be needed. I don't know if Councillor Lewis, if you would like to comment on it, because I think the pricing policy discussion, that's going to be one of the discussions, I think, around this RTP that we're going to tee up to have more conversation. We've been working with JPACT to develop pricing policies for the RTP. That's going to be what's in the draft plan that comes out. And I think that will be a starting point for the region to start talking more about, what is the future of pricing, whether it's congestion pricing or these other pricing mechanisms in our region, and how is it helping us make the investments that we truly need to be making to our system.
Well, thank you, Kim. I'm just, when ODOT conducted the environmental analysis for the I-205 project, right? Many of us asked, why is this being looked at, in this, with this fragmented approach in a silo? Why aren't we looking at this in the context of the RMPP? And they said, well, we can't look at this in the context of the RMPP because, well, that's not in the RTP. Yeah, right. So as we have these conversations going forward, that's what I'm just concerned that if we don't, include like proper phrasing and leave the door open, that we don't want to hear wells, all that's in the RTP is the RMPP. We can't have these other conversations.
All of them can be in the RTP in some way to allow for that more integrated conversation. And right now, the draft project list has all the tolling projects in there, including RMPP. And I think, answering, when I started to answer the question, there's uncertainty about what that means. I think the pause does provide a way to be able to look at all of them in a more integrated way, which I think this body and other elected officials have been asking for the past year or year plus, when the I-205 tolling amendment first came through into the RTP. So I think it's providing a path for that to happen, but that's not for the RTP to decide. But that's, I think that flexibility is there based on how the information is currently addressed in the draft plan and the project list, and we have draft policies around what this region would expect from pricing as a tool, whether it's any one of those forms of pricing.
Very good, thank you. Good information. Commissioner Shull, I'm going to let you up next.
Yes, good morning. Kim, I appreciate your slides. One of the things that has been talked about after we saw your slides at MPAC was, and this has been brought up this morning already, and that is the plan tends to be mass transit intensive, and we're concerned about what Clackamas County roads and bridges will look like in 5 years or 10 years. We need to make sure that the RTP is truly a plan that addresses regional needs. And that means that all transportation systems need to be addressed in a balanced way so that all boats rise together. So we truly have a real balanced effective transportation system for not just the more highly populated areas of the region, but also for those regions in Clackamas County that are more rural and at best suburbs. So thank you very much for considering that.
Very good. Good comments. Councillor Lewis.
Sure. Thank you so much. I wanted to kind of add my perspective along with Commissioner Savis's with the workshops. I was not able to attend last week. I was out of town, and blessedly they brought us back in person, which I think is good, but it meant that being out of town, I was not there. But previous workshops have been really focused on small group discussion, which is helpful for some things and not for other things. And to be able to sit at a table with 2 or 3 people from across the region and find more commonalities in what's going on with, say, Washington County, and even some of what's happening in East Multnomah County has been really valuable. It's not gotten all of our issues out on the record, and it's not really helped our bigger JPACT table prioritize, I think, what our JPACT stamp needs to be on this RTP. That said, I think based off of 6 or 7 opportunities for small cluster conversation, we're in a spot where what Clackamas's needs are is probably as aligned with the other 2 counties as it's been, at least for the past 5 years, maybe going back 8 years. So we have an opportunity, I think, to not have to go into the final parts of the RTP, pushing for our thing and trying to get everybody in a line with us, trying to make sure that we have the votes for our thing. I think it's going to be more important that as these prioritization conversations happen, other parts of the region remember that when we put forward our agenda items, they're supporting the same values and the same challenges that they have. So in particular, I think there's about 11 projects that are the top money projects. And one of those is Sunrise. How do we make sure that we get everything that we can for the prioritization list? Make sure that, yes, we have a huge amount of this RTP energy that's going into how we talk about and describe the interstate bridge. That's a statewide project. It's a regional project. It is what it is. But then in the shadow of that, there's like a dozen other projects. We need Sunrise to rise there. And similarly, we need our concerns around tolling to come into play when we have the pricing conversation. Because if we have a 2-year pause at the ODOT level, which we do, that's 2 years of 5. So we really need to be advocates for making sure the RTP recognizes and addresses that pause. And it's not just going to be 2 years, pick up, back to normal, back to the program we were at before. I raised that at council yesterday. I raised it here again, because I think it's really important we lay on the table. This pause isn't just now everybody go off and do your own thing, look the other way. Us as elected officials, we probably have to work just as hard, if not harder, the next 2 years. So when this whole thing starts up again in 2 years, we've gotten what we need done.
Very good comments. Yeah, spot on. I think we'll a couple more questions. We'll wrap this portion of today's presentation. Commissioner Savis, you're next up.
Yeah, appreciate everyone's comments. It's to Commissioner Scholl's point about he said the words balanced, and it just triggered a memory. Some of you will remember that I had advocated for a number of times that for the region, whether it's the UPWP or it's the RTP or any of the, and even JPAC itself, to change our vision, our mission statement towards trying to achieve a regionally balanced transportation system. And that has not gained any traction. And I find that troubling that there's not support for that very principle of having a regionally balanced transportation system. So therefore, we find ourselves underinvested in this portion of the county, South County, underinvested in, and we will suffer the most. And we suffer the most because of that underinvestment. And then when you tag on tolling and lack of alternatives and lack of transit, we suffer even again. So we suffer, and it just compounds the problem. And yet, I do appreciate the fact that in the RTP, as Councillor Lewis laid out, that the sun rises in there. Thank goodness. I really do appreciate that. But I do find it striking. Let's put aside the projects for a moment, those particular projects, the large capital projects, that the number one reason people don't buy electric cars, those who chose not to, is because of lack of charging stations. Seems to me that if our climate goals are really what they are, we would have a lot more robust discussion and investment showing up in investment of charging stations. Now, I'm sure the jury's out on that because some people believe that that's not a viable option, but the industries are moving that way, not just in the United States, but across the world. So that's a reality. But also when it comes to transit, I made this point very clear again on Thursday morning that while everyone's talking about capital investment in transit, our biggest challenge has been simply O&M, getting service and coverage in the basic areas, the basic services. So the haves and have-nots, the disparity between the haves and have-nots in those particular areas and arenas are striking and should be addressed. And if you don't start with the vision statement or the mission statement, then you're not going to get the net result. That's how organizations work. I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. We're going to take Councillor Pratt next. Commissioner Shull, I'll give you the last word of the session.
I'm just trying to understand how this process moves forward. So you've got these great large goals, and I don't know how you prioritize which is most important, but you do have it. I'm seeing community input on those priorities. So I'm just wondering, once you get that input, how you determine what actions you're going to take, and if you set expectations of results from those actions, and then if you look back to see if these goals are being met as expected.
Thank you for that question. So we are reporting, so Metro doesn't develop the project list. All of you develop the project lists with TriMet, ODOT that are forwarded into the plan. And so we are reporting back the community feedback. And so that is part of what I was sharing. We're still compiling that because we've had some very substantive feedback on the draft project list. And so that is right now, there's an opportunity for refinements to the project list to better address, where we're falling short based on the system analysis, and then what we're hearing from the community engagement between now and the end of next week, but also during the comment period, as we continue to put the plan together, do more analysis about its overall performance. I think that's it's the project sponsors, the lead agencies, the elected officials, it's JPACT and council providing feedback back on are these investments the investments that are helping advance the regional goals and community priorities. And I think trying to bring together all of the things that have been raised by each of the members here. There are local priorities, and the plan it needs to address those as well as the broader regional vision. So that's what this now we'll have a draft that'll have more feedback opportunity for refinement, and then we'll update it. I will also say that many of the local projects are locally funded. Sometimes with dedicated funding. There's also state projects that have funding that's already been dedicated to them, and those aren't projects that we would expect to change, but it's things that are new that are really unfunded that are falling within the revenue forecast that are the places that there's opportunity to make adjustments and change. And one last thing is that each project that has been forwarded has come from an adopted plan or study that went through a public process already. So they're not just new projects. Many of these have been around. And so I think as plans, local plans, new studies are undertaken, that's an opportunity to reflect on, are these still the right projects? In many cases, they may be, but there may be different solutions that we need to be thinking about now for a whole host of reasons.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Shull, you get the last word.
Yes, thank you. Real quickly, on the Sunrise Corridor from 122nd to 172nd, you recall that the state gave the county some $4 million to conduct a study on that. Last week, we let a contract out with Jacob Engineering. They will be doing extensive public outreach. They'll be looking at 3 different concepts for that Sunrise, followed by more public engagement, then a selection of a concept, followed by at least 10% of horizontal and vertical engineering for the Sunrise, being concluded by December of 2024. So we're getting close. This is happening, and it's very important in this RTP that funds for that very critical highway development be considered. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. And Kim, thank you as always for the presentation. It's always good to have you here bright and early in the morning. You
Yep,
field questions well.
I'm a morning person, so it's all good. Thank you for having me.
Very good. So we will transition now to Ted Liebold. We'll do some carbon reduction proposal updates. So Ted, you're on.
Great. Thank you, Trent. Good morning, C4 members. I'm going to share screen here. Oops, let's go this one. There we go. All right. Can we all see my screen okay?
I can see it on my side. Looks good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so again, thank you. I'm here to share information about the carbon reduction program, at least the portion of it that comes into Oregon that will be distributed through our Metro process. This is a new funding program that was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and it came with a set of objectives, which is there on the screen for you. And it really is comes with its set of direction that it needs to, that there's two elements that need to happen first. And we're in the process of working with the state of Oregon on this, is developing a statewide carbon reduction plan and strategy that must be done in consultation with metropolitan planning organizations across the state. And then the funding of projects and programs themselves need to be consistent with the strategies that are that will be submitted to the Federal Highway Administration. And it's pretty simple in terms of its purpose, which really is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in terms of both the plan and the projects that are funded. So at the statewide level, we've been fortunate in Oregon that we've actually done a lot of the carbon reduction planning that's required in the federal bill has already been completed because we were looking ahead in our state. At the statewide level, there is an existing statewide transportation strategy for the reduction of greenhouse gases, and that really has prioritized for the state investments in vehicle and fuel technology, transportation options, which are things like promoting projects and programs that promote people walking and bicycling, taking transit, carpooling, those sorts of things. They're going to focus on some of their system agency operations, and then also to invest in pricing as a carbon reduction strategy. At the statewide level, we actually have about $82 million coming into the state in total. The ODOT has a statewide allocation of almost $30 million, the process they're going to run. They're also running another program for investments in rural and smaller urban areas that's in the neighborhood of 23 million. And then there's another 20 some million that will go to the large MPOs large MPO areas. So at the metropolitan level for our within the metropolitan area, we'll have about $18.8 million available to us. That's a 5-year total, which is the length of that authorization bill. And again, we've also through the development of the climate smart strategy, I think already met the planning and strategy requirements of the federal bill. And so we will be working with ODOT to package this along with their statewide plan and strategy and to meet that planning requirement and submit that to the Federal Highway Administration. And then, of course, we also just need to be consistent with that state carbon reduction plan. So our climate smart strategy within the region, it has 9 strategies of how to reduce carbon in the region. Some of those are issues such as even just following up on our land use plans, but with the looking at the eligibility for what transportation investments could be made with these funds and which types of investments are going to be the most effective in reducing carbon emissions. These were the 3 strategies that we focused in on for the purposes of this funding as the most effective and most consistent with the federal rules. And that is to do investments in transit, to do investments in active transportation, and to do investments in system management and operations as the framing of the type of investments we want to make. So the timeline we are on right now is we have been already working with the state to make sure that we're meeting the requirements of the bill and getting that documentation of that planning and strategy work in place. And now we've been for the past 4 or 5 months developing the investment options to consider, coordinating with the state and the type of investments they're going to make, and then to select the priority investments. We've had some initial conversations with TPAC and JPACT and the Metro Council back in January to introduce the program. Based on that, we've developed some options for consideration, which I'll get into in a moment. And then once those are selected, we have to, so that's where we're at right now in this graphic. And then once those investment priorities are identified, we'll have to package those together with the state and submit those to the Federal Highway Administration. And then we'll have to program them into the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program individually. And then we'll be able to submit all of those and get to work. So in terms of putting together the options under consideration for the investments, we really were considering, again, the federal policy direction and the eligibility of the funds, what they can be spent on. The investment priorities I just went over from the climate smart strategy, and then the stakeholder input we received over the last several months. And I'd really just characterize that stakeholder input in terms of big picture ideas was people were looking for big transformative investments, which again is difficult to do with $18.8 million, which really it's a lot of money, but in transportation terms, it's not a lot of money. But we've tried to be responsive to that, looking to leverage other funding. And then we heard lots of different specific project and program ideas that could be invested in. So the process around which we've been working in the last several months is based on that input and direction. We put together, there were 5 investment package options that have been put together and considered, gotten input from both TPAC and JPACT on narrowing down those options. And then where we're at right now is TPAC just met a week ago Friday, and have made a recommendation to JPACT on considering 2 of the options and then have made a recommendation. And I'll share that now. So the recommendation that came out of TPAC that will be discussed at JPACT tomorrow are investments in these 5 areas you see here. And again, that's the project development work on the 82nd Avenue Bus Rapid Transit project. And this is $5 million that will be matched by TriMet to essentially get the work done that needs to be done to qualify for a large capital improvement program grant from the Federal Transit Administration to implement that project. The same type of investment for the Tualatin Valley Highway Bus Rapid Transit System. An investment in line 33 into Clackamas County that runs from Clackamas Community College along the McLaughlin corridor and then out to Clackamas Town Center to do transit signal priority along that line. And then climate smart implementation. So do some of the staff and tools that we need to better be able to implement the climate smart program. And then a $3 million investment in system management and operations types of improvements. And those are things such as signal timing on arterials, or they can be things such as pedestrian head start signal heads at intersections where there's lots of pedestrian activity, those types of technology and operations investments on the existing system. So next steps, JPACT action is scheduled for Thursday. So we're hoping to get a decision, a recommendation from JPACT, Metro Council adoption in June, and then we'll start our coordination process with the United States Department of Transportation and begin programming those projects into the transportation improvement programs at the metropolitan state levels. And so with that, I will stop sharing and we can have discussion.
Very good. Excuse me. Thank you for the information. Good presentation. You know, I'm always kind of curious with this. So we don't, and Commissioner Savas, I see you. I'll be right to you in a moment. I don't think that there are, we're not looking to measure the climate outcomes from these investments. And I think you're right. You know, 18.8 million goes quickly when you have big numbers trying to allocate. And so one of the things I'm curious about, so in my mind, the easy answer is, of course, you just try to offset single car driving as much as possible to have the broadest climate impact. And there was a slide from, I don't think it's your piece, but it was from a prior presentation that showed like the heat map of miles driven in the region. And it was, as one would expect, in the tighter metro area, everyone drives much less than average. And outside the metro area, your big bulk of Clackamas County, they drive way more than the average. And so my question is, as we look at programs like this to deploy assets, how do we deploy regionally to have the broadest climate specific impact, which in my mind would be impacting the areas that have the highest level of single car driving? Does that make sense?
Yes, so thank you for that question. And actually, if Kim was still here, I'd ask her to jump in as well. She was actually the lead planner on the Climate Smart Strategy project that really did that system level evaluation, identifying the most effective investments that we could make to reduce carbon emissions. And that's really where transit really jumped ahead of, in terms of the analysis that came out. Transit was really sort of the investment that was going to result in the largest reduction in carbon emissions. And I'm sure there's lots of reasons for that, lots of inputs that would that make that the case. But then there were obviously other investment strategies that worked as well. So I think it's really in terms of prioritizing those types of investments. It wasn't as geographic specific to, okay, investing in transit here versus there, but obviously you're trying to convert as many trips from, a single occupancy vehicle trip and the length of those trips, as you mentioned, as possible to get as much carbon reduction as you can. And so, I think what we tried to do here with this investment strategy was to really focus on where we could get the most reduction and spread that across the region. And I think the projects we have selected really represent a good cross-section of investments across the various parts of the region as much as we can. Plus, some of the systematic ones I think will really apply at that regional scale, in addition to these ones that are very specific to the 3 corridors I mentioned.
Sure, no, I appreciate that. I'm not trying to impugn any of the decisions that were made so far. I'm just more broadly kind of curious about how these things happen. So Commissioner Savas, you're next up.
Yeah, Councilor Sherman, I think you made a great point. You know, where the area where we have the highest VMT is where we ought to be spending the most. Frankly, my takeaway is we ought to be making the greatest investment in providing mobility options in more intensely. And it kind of goes back to my earlier comments. Instead of being focused on trying to spread out those investments, we're back to projects. And I appreciate Ted's presentation, you know, capitalize on the project, show the projects. But if you go back and Ted, if you could put up slide 5 again, I'd appreciate your slide 5. It talks about coverage, but we're not making investments in those areas. For example, one of the projects, one of the big capital projects of this $18 million is the 82nd Avenue. And 82nd Avenue, you know, what runs along 82nd Avenue is that's not the one. Slide 5.
Sorry, my slides aren't numbered on my screen.
Yeah, we'll go back one more. There you go.
Okay.
So while I appreciate, you know, there's some language in there about the very first one, transit investment, expanding transit coverage, that resonates with me. Expanded frequency of service, that kind of resonates with me. However, you know, I'm going to use my line 72 or the 82nd Avenue. Line 72 is one of the highest performing transit lines TriMet has in the region, probably in the state, right? We know, and just a few blocks away, we have the Green Line, a parallel light rail line. It's loaded with transit. So here we have areas where it's rich in transit, rich in options, and yet we're not really making the investment in coverage. And it goes back to projects. And I think we tried to make this point earlier today. We tried to make this point on Thursday. What are we really doing, whether it's the funding or to direct dollars more away from capital projects to coverage and putting options so that people, as Councilor Sherman's example was stating, where there's high VMT, there's just no options. So if we really invested in, let's say, climate, for these climate dollars for the purpose for carbon reduction, which is the goal, I think it seems logical that we would make those kinds of choices or try to prefer those types of projects or advocate for a means in which those dollars could go directly towards expanding coverage. And, you know, and if that's not possible and it's projects, there's not one mention of accommodating any new technologies that are coming along, such as, you know, electric cars with charging stations or hydrogen filling stations. There's no investments. Those are capital projects, but we're not doing those, right? Those could be spread regionally as well and across the board, but we're not doing that. So it doesn't seem that we're really putting our money where it's intended to go. I don't necessarily think that carbon reduction will be, if there was another way to spend $18 million, I think we could get a lot more bang for the buck in reducing carbon than investing in areas where there's high ridership, line 33, line 72, high ridership, areas where there's just transit deserts, where we, again, back to Councilor Sherman's point, we can make those investments in areas where people have alternatives so they don't have to drive their car. Vehicle miles traveled will go down, and there's a direct relationship between reducing VMT and carbon reduction. A lot said, thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Myers, you're next up.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation, both this one and the last, but I have to say, from the rural perspective, whenever I come to a Metro meeting, I remember a statement made in prior meetings that if you're not at the table, you're on the table. And I feel that way very much so about the rural areas. There was a comment earlier about insufficient investment in the peripheral areas. I see that as Clackamas County in the whole, but I really see it more in the rural areas that are immediately adjacent to the UGB that simply have no attention by Metro. It's not within their mandate. It's not within their bailiwick. I think that right here is the only place that the rural areas of Clackamas County, outside of the commissioners, of course, where the rural areas have a specific voice on Metro matters. I think none of this is going to change for either climate here, where we're talking about carbon reduction. And of course, carbon doesn't pay attention to UGB boundaries. What is in the county, in the rural areas, comes into the metro areas, and vice versa. And I very much doubt that the carbon analyses that have gone on behind this plan have analyzed the rural areas and the carbon issues that we have out here that are oftentimes not related to vehicles. It's backyard burns and it's timber burns. It's other type of emittance. I don't think any of that is taken probably into consideration here. Just like the regional transportation needs of the rural area are really not taken into consideration in the prior presentation. We don't have a voice. Let me suggest to Clackamas County, which is largely, even mostly rural, and is also on the wrong end of the stick in terms of regional asset allocation according to population. Why not put a voice beyond just this Metro subcommittee that is specific to rural areas on JPACT, MPAC, and TPAC? Why not allow us to sit at those tables? Right now, it may take a change in the bylaws, frankly, to get something that would happen that would change, a sea change, that would give Clackamas County more of a voice and the rural areas more of a voice. Something like that, I think is what has to be the goal, not only with the carbon plan here, but with the regional transportation plan. You're missing a voice, and we're a large part of this region, and you're not really a regional voice if you don't have us included. Thanks for my morning rant. I appreciate it.
Mr. Myers, always appreciate your thoughts. Thank you for sharing with us. Commissioner Schull.
Yes, good morning. Ted, my concern is that the CRP could actually conflict with an effective RTP and actually move us further away in Clackamas County from our real transportation needs. One thing about what Commissioner Savas mentioned is that does the CRP take into consideration industry's development of EV and other technologies like the hydrogen fuel cell and its potential to reduce carbon output without financial pressure on the budgets of our businesses and our families? It seems to me that industry and technology driven by the potential for profits is going to have a greater potential in carbon reduction than what government can do. So again, the CRP must consider tech, business, and tax dollar efficiency and looking at how we go about reducing carbon. Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.
Very good. Good comments. Actually, one question for you, Ted. Does is the funding for these projects, is this standalone funding? Are there other funding opportunities that kind of come into play with these to either enhance them or where dollars could be deployed somewhere else? I mean, do each of these kind of qualify as the single thing that it makes sense to use these dollars for?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. So a couple of responses to that. Just within the carbon reduction program, again, there is this money that has to be spent within our metropolitan planning area boundary. There is a similar pot of money that is for rural and small urban areas and that process is being run by the Oregon Department of Transportation for similar investments, but outside the metropolitan area. And then there is a third pot of the carbon reduction program, which is run by ODOT as well, but for investments across the entire state, either urban, rural, or small urban. And they're running that process. And again, will probably be focused on their system. And their statewide policy strategy really is prioritizing things like fuel conversion, those sorts of technologies, electrification, those sorts of investment. So that's really where they're focusing that statewide pot of money. I haven't heard what their proposed investments are yet. They haven't announced that, but that should be coming up actually this month, that you'll hear from them on that. This is also really just a one of several pots of money that come out of the federal government, and there's actually another new program. Well, there are other new programs and other existing pots of money. Another one of the other new programs is called the National Electrification and Vehicle Infrastructure Bill, or funds. Again, that's also being run by ODOT in the state of Oregon. And that's really looking at specifically at implementing electric vehicle infrastructure. And I know the first announcement of projects for that money, for the allocation of those funds, has come forward. I know they're looking at charging stations up and down I-205 and other major ODOT facilities in the state. Again, this is one small piece of lots of different funding opportunities for different types of investment. This one just has its own set of policy direction and its own little set of rules. So I hope that sort of gets at your question.
It does. I mean, federal projects tend to be more expensive. And so if we have opportunities to utilize other dollars to accomplish the things we're looking to accomplish, and we have opportunities to utilize these dollars in a targeted way, that quite often, we have 50 projects that we could be using this money for, again, just kind of trying to optimize expenditures. So, all right, seeing no other hands, Ted, thank you very much for the presentation this morning. Thank you for the information. Very good. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Councilor Saverin. Thank you, C4.
Very good. I think next up we've got a TPAC update. Mr. Wilson, who's got that one today?
Yeah, I'm bringing in our good friend Jamie Lorenzini from Happy Valley, and also a candidate to join the TPAC team named Will Farley. So I need a chance for y'all to meet Will, because one of your opportunities today is, as the cities, is to include him formally into the TPAC group, and that requires a little bit of a formal adoption by the cities. And so this would be a little bit of a city caucus, and I'll let Jamie take it away and introduce Will.
Yeah, thank you. So this is our second time approaching C4. By way of background, we have a really wonderful group of staff, both at the county and at the city level, that help represent our community at TPAC. And TPAC is advisory to JPACT. A nuance to TPAC is we can have more than one alternate to a primary seat. Currently, we have one alternate to the city's seat, which is Dana Webb of Oregon City. However, Will Farley attends a number of the same meetings as us. He leans into these conversations, and given Mayor Buck's role on JPAC, it seems like an excellent opportunity to bring Mr. Farley more into the fold by designating him as another alternate to the primary TPAC seat. I'm available if you have any questions. However, my request today is that this body consider formally nominating him to TPAC as another alternate to the primary seat.
Very good. Thank you for the information. Mr. Farley, would you like to say hello to the group, or Mayor Buck, any insight you have would also be greatly appreciated. I see, are you driving? You better be pulled over right now.
I am pulled over. I didn't expect to be called on. I'm sorry. I pulled over immediately as soon as my name came up. Yes, my name is Will Farley. I'm the traffic engineer for the city of Lake Oswego. As Jamie said, I just like to attend the meetings and kind of listen in, kind of what the goings-ons of the region are. So it's interesting to be pulled into this mix.
Very good. Well, it's good to have you here. Knowing you personally, Ms. Lorenzini, I take any recommendation you make to heart. So I greatly appreciate that. Mayor Buck, I see your hand is up. Please chime on in.
Well, yeah, I can't speak highly enough of Will. He's a great part of the team at the city, and just here recently with all the work that we've been doing, coordinating around the I-205 tolling project, he has been invaluable. So great to see him kind of formally joining the TPAC team. And I guess with that, if it's appropriate, I'd like to move his nomination to TPAC.
Very good. So, Mr. Wilson, do we need a formal motion to do this, or just a show of hands? What's the appropriate administrative way to handle this?
Yeah, I think if this was JPACT, I would be more like, let's do a vote like by email or something. But for TPAC, not that it's not as important, because obviously Will and Jamie do excellent work. But I think for our purposes, we are recording. If we can just do like a thumbs up or raise your hand or something like that in that fashion to codify this would be good.
Perfect. Well, we have an almost motion by Mayor Buck to forward Mr. Farley on for this position. So let's do a thumbs up for anyone who feels strongly about this role. And looking around the cities, any thumbs sideways or down out there that I should see before we move ahead? Mr. Farley, looks like you're moving ahead for consideration. Very good. Ms. Lorenzini, anything else to share with us today? That was it? That was the extent of it? Very good. Hey, we're back on schedule again. Well done, folks. So moving down the agenda, we've got our MPAC debrief and updates. Commissioner Shull, you taking this one today?
Yes, sir, certainly. MPAC met on the 26th of April. We had the RTP projects briefing from Kim Ellis that we heard this morning. We also received a briefing from Metro on the 2040 planning and development grants. They covered the project successes in the past few years and also gave us a heads up on the upcoming 2040 grant cycle, which is to begin this month. And then MPAC will meet again next week on May 24th. And on the agenda on that day, we have the MPAC consideration for MTAC nominees, an update from the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis from Ted Reed from Metro. Also, a briefing on the High Capacity Transit Draft Strategy Report from Amy Holmquist from Metro. And finally, a look at the 2023 RTP project list input and draft. Again, that's next week on the 24th. Thank you.
Very good. Any questions or comments from the group on what's happening at MPAC? Excellent. Well, it looks like we're getting close to crossing the finish line today. So since we have a few extra minutes, I'm just going to, Mr. Wilson, did you want to say something? You looked like you were almost going to speak, but nope.
I have a couple of updates, but they can certainly wait until after additional business that you have as the elected officials here.
Very good. Well, I think really the only thing that I have today, and this is just a random thought that I have, and again, since I'm co-chair, I can share random thoughts today. This is probably it's either a Mr. Wilson question or a Commissioner Savas question. So, you know, in all of the documentation we've seen on many of these really interesting proposals and a lot of the different levers we have kind of moving in different fashions, one of the things that I don't know if I've seen, and it's probably out there somewhere and I just don't know, is, again, me being a curious guy and kind of being a math head, on a daily basis, how many people commute via driving, via public transportation, via walking, via biking? Because I want to know the true gravity when we're deploying assets to trails and biking. I mean, I'm an avid biker and an avid walker, but you know, I couldn't walk to Portland every day to work. So I'm just really curious if I could get a handle on those actual numbers as we deploy resources. What difference? How far do you have to move the needle to make that difference from a broad perspective? And my point is, as I drive in Clackamas County, I would say, and again, this is completely a guess on my part, it's 1,000 to 1 drivers versus bikers on the side of the highway or on the main thoroughfares, or even give it the benefit of the doubt, 100 to 1. So when we make an investment in bike transportation, awesome, love the idea. What's the true impact? How far do we actually have to move the needle to take that 100 to 1, 10,000 people biking versus 1 million driving, how far do you have to move the needle to get that up to a third of the population, a quarter of the population, 5% of the population? So that's my question to the group or to anyone out there. If you've got that data, please help me to figure out where it is and how big the needle move needs to be to make some of these effective. That makes sense, doesn't it? It was random, but.
Thanks for asking that question. I'm going to say Karen Bjerg's name out loud so that she hears her name and then recognizes that I'm about to bring her over, because I think she may, if not have the answer, she may have a pulse on where that answer is achievable or if that conversation's even happening somewhere. So now I've given her plenty of warning and see if she's available to come over real quick. But I think that those are good questions. I think that's pertinent, good information to have as you're having these broader conversations. And I've stalled long enough for the expert to be in the room. Hi, Karen. Did you hear the question?
I did hear the question. I've been listening to the conversation all along. And the one thing that comes to my mind is that really a lot of this is often reflected as mode share. We talk a lot about what share of the trips are by different modes, be it automobile or bicycle or pedestrian. And so while I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, I think that's something that we can work on bringing back to you. But it is also something that it's taken into consideration as different investments are made, I think is one thing. But then we're also got this really interesting quandary that we're always working with regards to what is the best investment to make now, and how can we make investments that allow more people to use those different modes, right? So it's kind of something that we're always trying to balance.
And I know that does make sense. I guess it, theoretically is kind of a chicken and egg thing. If the reason it's 100 to 1 is because the facilities aren't there to make it, a lot, closer. So, and I appreciate that. Obviously, bringing in the expert makes sense. And Ms. Bjerg, you always have good information for us. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, just one point I want to make in that there is, if you look at the data of what that share is today, at this point in time or moment in time, that's one thing. But if you also need to look at the trends, like where's it trending? And we've known here recently, recent last few years, that the trends in ridership are down significantly. You can associate that to COVID to a degree, but also the interesting thing is that as far as ped and bike usage for bikeways, pedways, that's also trending down, yet we're investing more money in it. So I'm not sure exactly. I'd love to drill down on that data, but I think that a lot of people are inclined to make decisions based on data and based on trends to make sure we're going the right direction, and also that we actually have overarching goals that our investments meet those goals as well. So good question. I did raise my hand for a different reason, knowing that we're time limited here. I want to give everyone an update, but I want to make sure this conversation is completed. So I'll just pause until this conversation is completely vetted through.
Okay, very good. Mr. Miles, we'll give you a comment, and then Commissioner Savas, I'll jump back to you.
Just real quick, it's the same thing that Commissioner Savas just said. Ridership on biking is down. I'm a bike rider too, and I follow sites that are questioning why this is, and no one really knows. I believe people in the metro area, perhaps Multnomah County, are looking at why ridership is down, whether it's just a generational thing. Boomers tend to ride bikes more than other groups. But anyways, it's a real problem. I think of all of the money we put into biking and pedestrian as aspirational. I just don't think we live up to it. Thanks.
Well, and I think that's why I brought up earlier in the conversation, there are some great slides in the RTP that shows kind of how far they've come relative to their goals in the different areas. And the bike ped network in the equity focused areas is like 90+% complete at this point. And so my question is, has the needle moved? We've done it. We've got to that point in that area. So what's the impact? And I think that would be very easily measurable. And my gut, again, not an expert, but my gut tells me it's not like 50-50 and it's not like 90-10. So again, making sure we deploy assets in the right place. Commissioner Savas, it is all yours. Take us home.
Well, to just segue, Counselor Sherman, I would say the needle is moving. It's moving the wrong way, which is a great segue into what I'm going to give you an update on with regards to tolling. I think a lot of us were pretty encouraged when the governor put the pause on the tolling program till January 2026. But come the light here in public meetings, some upper top officials of ODOT seem to be conveying a message that tolling's going full speed ahead. They're just simply pausing on the toll collections. I believe that when I heard what the governor's requests were, besides the pause, was also reporting, greater opportunities for local input. Those have not yet come to fruition. It is truly a little bit early to expect that. But it would be nice to know that committee's underway and maybe jurisdictions are identified for involvement, but we can be patient there. We're signaling that with some letters and messages and so forth. But I did want to bring you all to bring to your attention that the ODOT officials seem to be conveying a different message than what we were hoping for. That said, on Monday morning, the Regional Tolling Advisory Committee will be meeting. Mayor Bubenik from Tualatin is on that committee, myself, and Mayor Rory Bliatowski is also a member of that group. And they changed the agenda from talking about monitoring to having an open dialogue with all the members. So I think that each member around this regional table, not a Clackamas table, but a regional table, will be asked to share their thoughts on tolling or the pause or whatever it may be. And I'm just what we have discovered, and I know some of the mayors that are on this call, some of the members that are not on this call have been in the state legislature, talked to our state legislators, and it is becoming overly evident that some of our legislators are completely unaware of what the concerns and documents that we have expressed. Mayor Buck, I'd love to have your opinion on that, but I find it really discouraging if the messages that are conveyed to ODOT, our documents, our words, our comments are going to the ODOT officials and going somewhere else other than the decision makers, because that appears to be the case here, which is why that local representation is really, really important. I will say in defense that Director Strickler of ODOT did say that he's going to take those messages back to the OTC, but the OTC is not making the decisions. The legislature is making the decisions. Mayor Buck, any input on that?
Well, I mean, the good news is that, we have very strong support from our Clackamas, caucus. So they are definitely, so I'm not sure, Commissioner Savas, if you're referring to some of our other friends on that Joint Transportation Committee who, who are very stuck. But I think that, I think we are, I don't know who all in this meeting is on this joint, letter that we're sending into the media today. Okay. It's a good letter. We just have to, I think the best thing we can do is work with our delegation to help hone out whatever this process is going to be for the subcommittee that they formed and ensure that this isn't just some, performative measure to, delay implementation. That was definitely not the intent of our legislators who asked for this, nor the governor and leadership. So, but yeah, I think we have, like Councilor Lewis was saying earlier, now we have got to work even harder now than we did before to make sure that this time just doesn't pass and we find ourselves, Groundhog Daying it here in 2026, right?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and also thanks to Mayor Milch and others who have been part of this work and going down to Salem where we can to advocate. I think what I was really telling a lot of people and hoping for, and I think this is the most important point I'll make this morning on this topic, and that is a lot of us expected that there would be a hearing on one of these tolling bills. We put a lot of energy on advocating for that, a lot of energy and time. And we have been, it's been the opportunity to testify before the legislature or the Transportation Committee legislators for example, has been usurped. Right? We had one of the co-chairs say there's no need for any hearings. And, I don't think that was the intent of the governor when she put the pause on, but a consequence of the pause is that we haven't had an opportunity to talk directly to or share our thoughts directly with those decision makers on the transportation committee. That's a big deal for me. That seems to just, that's not the Oregon way of communication, public process. That's not what the hearings are. I mean, not having a hearing on a topic of this magnitude, there's something fundamentally wrong with that. I'll just end there. Thank you all.
Appreciate the comments. Mr. Wilson, and then close us up.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just going to piggyback on some of those things that were just mentioned. One of them is the group letter, which is actually an op-ed that's being drafted by a few jurisdictions. And so all of your jurisdictions that are on the affected 205 corridor are affected by the proposed tolling are going to get an email from me, mostly the mayors, here in just a few minutes, just requesting y'all to sign on with us and give y'all like a deadline by noon tomorrow. Our board's going to approve their ability to join it tomorrow as well. So Commissioner Savas will help with that. But there was a small team helping to draft that. Mayor Milch was part of that. Or Lake Oswego was part of that too. So it's been written by a small group, but we'll get the approval by the big group and try to get that into an op-ed later this week. It's doing the same thing you're talking about. It's proposing that bigger, broad, we're united message, requesting local inclusion or local voices be included in the process. So very consistent with what many of y'all have talked about, but also a little bit of a different approach to do a joint op-ed like this. We normally do a letter or something else like that, but this has been fun. And also we're trying to get it done in the next, 24-ish hours or so and get it put into, hopefully the Oregonian is our target. So stay tuned. If you're on that group and that email, you'll get something from me very shortly. And on that same note, the retreat is coming up. Many of you are already registered. Thank you. Awesome. The registration actually is looking really good. It should be a robust conversation. There's a housing day, but on this topic, since this is really transportation focused right now, that morning will be focused on a visit from ODOT to talk about what the new normal looks like from their expectations. So we're hoping that we give y'all a chance to have that early conversation with them about what is the new normal. And then have a conversation we're trying to tee up with legislators who are going to either be on that subcommittee or part of that subcommittee or who have created. So similar to what you just talked about, a chance to have that conversation about how to be involved. And then we're going to politely invite them out of the room so that y'all can have a family meeting of sorts and sit around the proverbial kitchen table and talk about how y'all want to come out of that room together with a continued amount of voice over the next, 6 to 12 months during the pause and what you're hoping to achieve during that process. So it's going to be kind of a tight group with probably some hard conversations, but we're going to try to help you be constructive through that process. So I wanted to say all those things so that there is a forum coming up, and it's like 2 weeks away. There's a forum coming up where y'all will be able to get into the weeds on this a little bit, and ideally, and in an ideal location where it's not like on a Zoom recording, and you're kind of in a group and can say some of the more candid feelings that you're talking about.
Very good. Thank you. We are at the top of the hour. Been a productive day. Good to see all of you. Look forward to seeing all or some of you at the retreat, and have a great Wednesday.